This is the World Organic News for the week ending 4th of June 2018. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. This is a long weekend here in Ireland, technically referred to as a bank holiday. We are off to look at another property, 8 acres, good shedding, etc. and etc. Oh, and a fine looking 3-bedroom house as well. So this episode is pre-recorded. It was triggered by a couple of things this week. I listened to an episode of Farming Today from the BBC on the future of farming, post-Brexit. Yet again, there was an idiot expert telling all and sundry how devastating animal agriculture is. You know the sort of thing. We grow crops to feed animals. They convert it at a rate of about 4 kilos in for every 1 kilo in animal growth. What a waste. Why don't we just eat the crops grown for, in this case, cows? There is so much wrong with this, and I get worked up every time an expert, usually an economist, so we all know how expert, sprouts this line of spurious reasoning. So, let me refute at some length. What these people are referring to is CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, feedlots, animal prisons, however you want to call them. Here the beasts are fed a corn or barley-based feed for 6 months or so until they are ready for market. It appears that the 6 months is a happy coincidence, for if you feed a ruminant on cereal for more than 6 months, they die or become very unwell and drop condition. The feed, the cereals, are being force-grown with artificial fertilisers, herbicides and pesticides, all powered by, in the US, the wonder ingredient of agricultural subsidies. Watch or rewatch, if you've already seen it, the film King Corn for a detailed explanation of the US agricultural subsidies in the corn system. The feed being grown for the unfortunate inmates of the CAFOs is not your sweet corn, but a highly specialised form of maize that can be treated very much like crude oil. It pours into one end of a factory and comes out the other in many forms, from corn flour to high fructose corn syrup, and many things in between, which are then poured into the processed food sector. If you want a more efficient system for creating obesity, you'd be hard-pressed to find it. What the experts on these programs fail to realise is that not all agricultural lands can be put to the plough to grow cereals. In fact, even those that can be actually benefit from the addition of livestock. I've discussed the use of ruminants as soil creators and stimulants in previous episodes. Pack them tight, move them regularly, and don't come back to the same piece of land for at least 3 months, and the soil grows over time. The fertility these properly managed herds or flocks bring is beyond almost imagination. The systems mimic the vast now gone bison herds of the North American West, the gnu, zebra, gazelle and so on of the African savanna, and well-managed late 18th century Western European farms. By rotating the herds and a smaller area of cereals across the landscape, better food is produced. Higher protein content in the cereal, disease disruption by avoiding a monoculture situation, and an ability to increase complexity. It is strangely paradoxical that natural systems appear, from my observations at least, to become more stable when they exhibit a greater level of complexity. Natural systems, it is worth remembering, are not mechanical systems. Because we in the developed world have grown up in a culture which worships the mechanical, and to be fair, it has many gifts, not the least of which is the laptop I wrote this on, and the audio device I'm recording in, motorcycles and non-stick ironing boards, but nature is not a machine. Applying the Henry Ford idea of segmentation and specialisation of labour to natural systems does not a sustainable system create. Many, if not all landscapes are, we are told, altered by humans. What's usually left out of that statement is that we have altered them through the use of animals, not just the plough. The hill country of the UK, the high plateaus of Spain, the uplands of Turkey have all been shaped by sheep, goats and or a combination of the two. So it was with great delight I discovered the blog Sacred Sueños. I'm pretty sure I've mispronounced that, apologies to all Spanish speakers. But this blog has had 2 posts. Goats, destroying the landscape or healing it, and Essential Equines. These explore the maintenance and system enlivening effects of, in the first case, goats, and in the second, horses. A quote from the second post. Quote, Last post, I focused on goats as a great example of how herbivores can regenerate the land through holistic management techniques, but they aren't the only ones within our agroecology. We also have horses, and sometimes also work with donkeys in a similar pasture rotation system, often on their own, but sometimes sharing pastures with the goats, depending on the type of vegetation available. Because our equine friends are grazers, the predominant vegetation is low to the ground, making it easier to lay fences without having to clear a lot of brush that would be grounding the electric fence. It's also easier because they only require one strand of tape to contain them, compared to the two that barely keep in the capricious goats." End quote. Eves, the author, then goes on to point out the drawbacks of equine grazers in their landscape. Horses need pasture, mountains aren't good at that all year round, and so on. He goes on further to point out that the part of Ecuador he lives in, horses are plentiful and relatively inexpensive form of transport. So we need to challenge obvious falsehoods when we see and hear them. I sent an email to the BBC asking for corrections and pointing out not just the stupidity of the statements made, but the general consensus on the program that the statements re animal ag and greenhouse gases were correct. I would urge all my listeners, critical thinkers as you all are, to become or continue to be annoying letter writers. I think it might just make a difference. We can only hope. And with that, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. Now, as a podcast listener, and you've made it to the end of this show, you may be thinking of producing your own podcast, but you're not sure where to begin. Drop over to mrjohnmoore.com. There's a link in the show notes, and pick up the free checklists I've written to help people get started. I'm also doing a live presentation on YouTube at the link in the show notes this coming Friday on podcasting workflow that I had to postpone for a week because of technical issues, but this Friday for sure. So I'd love to see you there. You can also receive a transcript of this episode at worldorganicnews.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.